So, for those of you who don't know, Bhakti Vijnana Goswami is a sannyasi, a leader, a guru from the Russian yatra. He has been in the Russian yatra serving for many, many years, and virtually from the very beginning. And we want to hear a little bit about the phenomena of the Russian yatra, the phenomena of Hare Krishna in Russia. It has been growing exponentially in the past 20 or so, maybe even longer years. And we want to know a little bit more about that, because I know my viewers, we've heard a lot about the Russian yatra. We see Russian devotees are virtually everywhere, all over the world. Even here in America, in New York City, there's a whole group of Russian devotees. In India also. So we want to know a little bit more about that. And Maharaj is the best person to tell us about that, because he's been there from virtually the very beginning. So Maharaj, let's start off personally. Very briefly, how did you come in contact with Krishna consciousness?
Well, in 77, Srila Prabhupada sent His Holiness Gopal Krishna Maharaj to Russia. After being in Russia once in 71, Srila Prabhupada personally directed or ordered Gopal Krishna Maharaj to go to Russia, and he went there with the book fair. And he reported actually to Srila Prabhupada about the success of this expedition. There was a big international book fair in Moscow, and a friend of mine, who was my roommate in the university, Moscow State University, he met the devotees in this book fair, got a book of Srila Prabhupada, and ultimately he got involved in Krishna consciousness, and he involved me. He gave me Bhagavad Gita, not Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, because Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita at that time, I think there was maybe 2 or 3 copies for the whole of Soviet Union. It was not Russia at that time. He gave me some old edition, Russian edition of Bhagavad Gita, and Bhagavad Gita basically changed my life. I read it within one evening or maybe 2 evenings, and I realized that there is something wrong with the way I was thinking before. So that was the beginning.
And you had done, you were very educated in the sense of you have your PhD and you were doing a science degree. Is that right?
Yeah, I was doing working. I graduated from a chemical department of Moscow State University, and I was working in the Institute of Molecular Biology of the Academy of Science, Russian Academy of Science, studying the molecular structure of chromosomes, how the DNA with the proteins interact, and how the DNA is so compacted within the chromosomes, because DNA is a huge molecule which is compacted into the cell, and how still, despite of this very compact structure, it's available and the information is being read by the proteins, so on and so forth. So that was my educational background.
Right. So I understand that the Russian yatra, even when I was a kid, like I grew up in the 90s, I remember Harikesha Swami and his group, they were very much like, they were all over Europe as well, heavy book distribution, and in Russia, Soviet Union. Tell us a little bit about what part did you play in those times, kind of in the 90s?
I started chanting Hare Krishna mantra in 1980, and I practically from the beginning, I started chanting my 16 rounds or more. And at that time, it was a heavy period of persecution. Russian devotees were really persecuted by the state. I believe it was in 1983 or 84, the KGB chief or deputy KGB chief published an article, and he listed the three major threats to to Soviet Union, to communist ideology of Soviet Union, and Hare Krishna was among these three major threats. The first one was rock music. Another one, I believe, was, I don't know, consumerism or something like this. And the third one was Hare Krishna. So, you know, the communist regime at that time was very alarmed by the spread of Hare Krishna movement in Russia. Even though it was totally underground, there was just a handful of devotees, but nevertheless, they were very enthusiastic. They were printing Prabhupada's books illegally, distributing Prabhupada's books. And they were so alarmed that they created the separate department in the KGB just to deal with Hare Krishna movement. And I got involved by that time with Hare Krishna movement, and ultimately I got involved involuntarily with the secret police of Russia, which is called KGB. So that's why I had to leave Russia, leave the Soviet Union in 1987, I believe. And I went to Sweden. Kirtiraj Prabhu, who was at that time the GBC person, GBC secretary for Russia and the whole Eastern Bloc, he arranged my, you know, by some trick, he arranged me out of Russia. He sent some lady devotee, and there was some paper marriage between one Swedish girl and myself.
And how long did you stay in Sweden for?
I was staying in Sweden in '94, and my main service at that time, I was mostly in Korsnäs Gard in New Radakund, and my main service was to translate Srila Prabhupada's books into Russian, or edit some rough Russian translation, which was done in Russia. So, and also help some other languages of the former Soviet Union or Soviet Union to arrange their translation into their languages. So I was there, and I was heading this Russian department in North European BBT. And as you said, at that time, Harikesha Maharaj was very, very prominent figure. Under his guidance, millions of books were distributed, and especially his specialty was that he was arranging the translation of Prabhupada's books into different languages. At that time, there were probably not less than 20 different languages, devotees of different languages were there in Korsnäs Gard translating Prabhupada's books into Polish, into Czech, into Serbian, into Croatian, into Uzbek, into Kazakh, you know. All this was, it was a very amazing time. And I remember Harikesha Maharaj, every time during Mayapur meetings, he would bring this high stack of books and would offer it to Prabhupada. You know, there were basically dozens and dozens of Prabhupada's titles were translated into different languages.
I want to talk about that for a minute. What was it about Harikesha Maharaj that made him such a powerful unifying agent at that time, unifying power? What was it about him that did that? I mean, it's amazing what he has accomplished in that time. So I just want to know a little bit about him and what was it about him that made him like that?
He is a very powerful person, and he was capable of inspiring many other powerful persons. He is a brilliant manager. He has very brilliant managerial abilities. Actually, the story is that I recently spoke with him, and he reminded me about the story. He was Prabhupada's secretary, and his service was to cook for Prabhupada, serve Prabhupada, and record Prabhupada's lectures. So he was giving a class in Vrindavan at that time during Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was present during this class. And there were some rich Indian people, some businessmen who came, and these people approached Prabhupada after his class. They were very impressed by his class. He is a brilliant speaker. So they came to Prabhupada and they said, he speaks very nicely. Why don't you let him manage? Harikesha Maharaj said, I don't know what is the relationship between speaking and managing, but in his case, definitely there was. So Prabhupada made him GBC member and BBT trustee at the same time. Appointed him as the BBT trustee, and definitely BBT work was very dear to his heart because he has been recording Prabhupada's spoken words and transcribing Prabhupada's dictation of his translations for years by that time. So he was personally very inspired. He's a revolutionary by nature, and he graduated from New York University. I don't exactly know which one, but in sociology department, and he was a revolutionary, and he saw in Krishna consciousness the real revolution or real sociological, so to speak, the real solution to the problems of the society. So he was very much inspired by Prabhupada's books and by disseminating Prabhupada's message into this, in his zone, so to speak. So he was inspiring many very powerful leaders powerful devotees to distribute books. Harinamananda at that time, and Navina Nirada, who is still distributing so many books. But his specialty was that he was inspiring the translation of the books into the local languages. And for that, the whole Department of North European BBT was created in this Korsnäsgård, Sweden, which is still very active and very powerful branch of the BBT. But at that time, it was amazing. The atmosphere there was very amazing, because every now and then, there was a custom in North European BBT that when the particular language would come to Chaitanya Charitamrita, to translate Chaitanya Charitamrita, there was marathon. As much as Prabhupada arranged marathon to produce Chaitanya Charitamrita within 2 months, so that was more or less the tradition in Korsnäsgård to produce the whole Chaitanya Charitamrita within 3-4 months or something like this. So every now and then you would hear now the Polish language is doing Chaitanya Charitamrita marathon, and it means that there will be some madness going on.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about him, because what we do mostly hear about is what happened after he left. and the confusion of everyone, but we never really hear what was it about his personality that made him so empowered and so powerful when it came to spreading Krishna consciousness.
He was a very inspirational speaker, and his very strong point of his personality was that he could delegate the service in a very proper way. People felt empowered. In fact, I can share my own experience. In '94, I moved back to Russia with the idea to continue with the BBT work, but also there was a major shift in my service at that time because Hare Krishna movement in Russia was under the major threat from some legislation which was there in the parliament, and anti-cult people were very active. So my main service for some time was communications and protecting Hare Krishna movement from the external threat, so to speak. In the beginning of '90s, because we became big, and naturally it created a strong opposition. So he sent me, and he actually gave me such empowerment. I still remember I was doing tremendous things at that time, not because I'm as such, I'm quite a timid person by nature, but because I felt empowered by him. And I felt completely, totally protected. I actually never in my life I was feeling so protected, because while giving some service, he was not only giving the service, he was giving complete, total protection, because everyone knows, if you're in a leading position doing something, you need some protection from the top, because you will be attacked from all sides, within the society, outside, this and that. So I felt totally, completely sheltered and protected by him. That was his specialty. Whoever was working under him felt that he is safe. He can do his service, and he felt the sense of empowerment was there. He was not micromanaging. He was the real leader, and he was a visionary also. And that contributed to some problems later, because he wanted to solve the problems of the whole society, and he was taking too much on his shoulders, basically. So it's very unfortunate what happened, and it's very unfortunate that people are now, devotees now, don't know much, as you said, about his contribution. And I think that's eternal, because what he did, nobody was able to do. These moments when he was sitting in front of Prabhupada's murti in his Prabhupada's room in Lotus Building in Mayapur were very special, offering him the stack of books. I usually was present during these moments, and I could feel that he is just basically speaking with Prabhupada and reporting to Prabhupada about the most dear service which Prabhupada had, while translating his message into the different language. So it's very unfortunate what happened, and especially what happened, that what is happening even now, that his contribution is not properly recognized. There may be some problems, but he was under the tremendous stress for years. And he was taking different responsibilities during this most difficult forming years of Hare Krishna movement, zonal acharya years, and this and that. And
when he stepped down from his post and when he left, what was your attitude towards that, being his disciple? And I know many devotees left because of, it's a faith crushing thing when a leader, is falls from their position and whatnots. But what was your personal attitude towards the whole thing? How did you process it?
It was a very difficult time, perhaps the most difficult time in my life, definitely, because he was very dear to me personally as a person. I was his, I was quite close. He never really, his disciples, when never really too close to him. He was very careful about this, but I was as close as possible. I was cooking sometimes for him. I was serving him, and I was translating. Whenever he would go to Russia, I was translating with him. So whenever he would be there, I would be with him for 24 hours, day in and day out. Wow. And it was personally very difficult for me, because I never subscribed to his views. I knew that he's just undergoing through a certain test and difficult period, which will be gone after some time. But because of at that time there was no social media, but still internet was already there. Because of this internet, the situation around him became very politically, so many people in the society were demanding that he should be more or less punished and crucified. Whereas my feeling was, leave him alone. He is in a very difficult period of time. He has to sort out something inside. He is great devotee who contributed a lot to Prabhupada's movement. Please give him some space, some private space where he could really, sort out something internally. But this facility was not given to him. In one sense, I understand why, because there was this, demand from the society of devotees, which sometimes is, oftentimes, as any, big social thing, it's not always rational what is going on in the societies, So, and the leaders of the movement, the GBC, were under this tremendous pressure. And instead of giving him some space and protecting him, there was this very heavy sort of resolution. Understandable under the social pressure which GBC was, but it was not fair in many regards, and that created a trauma to him. And of course, the different disciples of his reacted differently. Some disciples, they were very loyal to him, and they immediately changed their attitude towards Krishna consciousness, left Krishna consciousness altogether, or started subscribing to different views. Others remained in ISKCON and developed very critical attitude towards him. And I was somewhere in the middle. I was, I knew that it's just a temporary thing. That was my attitude.
And you being one of the senior members there, after he left his post, did you have to come in to do kind of like, damage control in the sense of like, okay, things are falling apart and I got to, there's someone has to come in and help out. Was there a group of people, or was it you, or was it a few? Like, how did that happen?
During the most difficult time, crisis time, there were other GBCs for Russia, for Soviet Union, who were there in Moscow, who were helping a lot. Niranjan Maharaj was there all the time, and Bhakti Vaibhav Maharaj was there. Gopal Krishna Maharaj came there specifically to deal with this critical situation, because it was, the majority of devotees in the Soviet Union at that time were his disciples, his loyal disciples, sometimes his fanatical disciples. And there was a major split in the society. So Bibi Govinda Maharaj came at that time. So they were all there during the most critical period. That was August, September of 1998. Even Radhanath Maharaj came very bravely. He came at that time. It was difficult period of time. Where some of his loyal and fanatical disciples, they were threatening, and it was not a very pleasant situation, which I don't want to dwell too much on.
Sure.
But when they left, it actually fell on my shoulders more or less, because I was made by Harikesha Maharaj at GBC at that time. In 96, I became the GBC member, first the candidate, and then 97, I became the GBC member. So it mostly was, to a greater extent, it was my responsibility, especially for Russia. For Ukraine, Niranjan Maharaj was taking care. And it was not so dramatic in Ukraine, because leaders there were a little more level-headed. But in this case, it was mostly my headache.
Right. Was the persecution from the government at the same time of this change with the management of ISKCON? Was that happening simultaneously, or was it?
No. The severe persecution was during the Soviet days of Russia, so to speak, because for the West, Russia, Soviet Union is basically the same. For them, Ukraine is Russia, Belarus is Russia, Uzbekistan is Russia. They all say Russia. But Russia is a different entity. It's a different, separate country. And in 1991, I believe, the Soviet Union fell apart. Unfortunately, I must say. Anyway, it's another drama. The communist regime also more or less was finished at that time in 91. So the persecution was basically from late 70s, like 77, probably even 79. From 79 to 86. Because in 86, Gorbachev started his perestroika, and the regime was much more soft and not so oppressive, and the communist ideology became different. So due to the Gorbachev's influence, till probably 87, 88, it was the difficult time. And I highly recommend to you to invite Kirtiraj Prabhu as a guest to your show and ask him about this period of time. So, but in '88, the Russian society, or Soviet Hare Krishna movement was officially registered in the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And after the long procedure, it was actually the first religious organization officially registered in the Soviet Union after the Second World War, because the government didn't want to register any new religious organizations. So we had the privilege of being the first religious organization registered officially, recognized officially by the government in 1988. And so the threat from the government was different at that time. There was just pressure. It was not such a threat, but it was a difficult situation. Yeah, it was going on simultaneously. External situation was not, has never been actually very peachy and rosy. But the internal situation became very intense. So it was, it was quite mad.
Yeah. So 1998 was when, there was that, change of management, and then to devotees, there was a confusion and whatnot. And so it fell on your shoulders to kind of pick up the pieces there. So what did you do to keep people inspired, keep things together? I don't know how many temples there were, how many devotees were there, and what was like the situation at the time?
It's difficult for me to say for the whole Russia, because I was mostly in Moscow, and Moscow was the most, a most important center, and still most important place for the whole Russia, because Moscow is the place where everything happening. So the temple was deserted. All of a sudden, we had, the temple room packed, and all of a sudden it was empty. The temple room was packed practically every Mangalarati. We had at least, in Moscow temple at that time, we had at least 100 devotees for every Mangalarati. And then, from 100 devotees, we went to 3, something like this. So what I did, I basically started educational programs for the devotees, because I felt that this somewhat irrational reaction, or this dramatic situation, emotionally understandable, but the dramatic situation showed that devotees were not very established in their philosophical views. Right. They didn't have deep roots in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and that's why they were swayed by some propaganda of some emotional propaganda. Of course, Russian people are generally emotional, and that's why they're easily swayed one way or another. They are like Indians in this regard. They're quite emotional.
There's similarities. There's a lot of similarities.
There is definitely a lot of similarities. Once Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj said that there is, Russian people, the Western people, they are gross and rational. Russian people, they are gross and emotional. And Indian people, they are emotional and subtle. So that was his analysis.
Right.
Anyway, so I started educational programs, and that was basically my own inclination all the time, and I was happy doing these educational programs. We started Bhakti Shastri in a big way, and that changed the situation ultimately. And those devotees who remained, they remained. Of course, there were some other problems. It was never like there was never a dull moment when you are in Russia.
Yeah, I guess you were educating devotees to understand like Guru Tattva in the sense of that it's a lot more than a personality or one person. There's a tattva involved with that.
Yeah. Exactly. What I did actually, I invited Shivaram Maharaj to give the seminar, initial seminar. I think he was the first one who came after this dramatic situation more or less was sorted out. In October, he came very graciously. He agreed and he gave his seminar on Shiksha, Diksha and Guru Tattva basically. And that was very helpful, and it created some sanity for many devotees.
Right. Let's talk a little bit now more in recent times, let's say in the 2000s. What was the kind of the pulse at that time, and when did it really pick up? Because right now it's just exponentially growing. I think there's some 100 temples in just one little city, or Bhakti Vrikshas like everywhere, and thousands of devotees. That's what I hear. So let's talk a little bit about more recent times.
No, it's an exaggeration that there is 100 temples in one city.
That's what I'm hearing. If it's an exaggeration, yeah, you heard it here.
It's a mythological story. Yeah, there may be a lot of Bhakti Vrikshas, maybe. Yeah. But it's also sometimes little inflated from the reality figures.
Right, okay.
But see what happened when Soviet Union fell apart and when Russia became all of a sudden open. That was before, in the end of 80s, beginning of 90s. Communist ideology, which was dominant ideology of the time, was not functioning. People were completely disillusioned, and they were started to look for solutions. The vacuum which was created by the complete fall of communist ideology actually opened the doors to all kinds of different religious movements. Not only Hare Krishnas, we were the first one, but not the last one. So many religious movements, they just flooded Russia. All kinds of Munis and Mormons and this and that, they all basically entered Russia at that time, and Russian people were very Om Sindrikyo, that was very prominent and very very noticeable in Russian society at that time. So all kinds of sects were there, all kinds of new religious movements were there. And therefore, naturally, the reaction against all these new religious movements was also there, allergic reaction of the conservative part of the society. Because all these new movements or novelties, they threatened to destroy the fabric of the society. So that's why I came in the beginning of 90s back to Russia and started this public relations work. But actually, from the very beginning, when I came, I realized that it's not that the external threat is most important at that time. immediately when I came in 94, I realized that the most problem are coming from the inside. The devotees are not educated. They cannot really interact with the society. They interact in a very unhealthy and fanatical way with the society, with people. They alienate people against our movement. And that's why what all this situation happened. So I started educational program even before that, because I realized that this was not the main problem. The main problem is inside Russian society. But at that time, already millions of Prabhupada's books were distributed in Russia and former Soviet Union, the countries of former Soviet Union, because it was easy at that time. In the beginning of 90s, there was a severe economic crisis. The whole economic system fell apart. There were huge factories which couldn't pay their workers. So the book distributors at that time, they would come to a factory and they said, why don't you, they didn't have cash money. They only had money in the banks, but they didn't have cash money. So they couldn't pay the workers their salaries. So the book distributors, they used this situation. They came and they would say to the director of this particular factory, why don't you get our books, give us some bank money we can accept, and instead of salary, you give our books to the workers. So it was not unusual that one book distributor would distribute, 20,000 books within one day, or something like this. Because he would subscribe the whole factory or the whole, mine, charcoal mine or something like this. They would go to some remote places and subscribe people. So there were millions of Prabhupada's books, literally. Actually, in the beginning, Harikesha Maharaj and North European BBT, they donated 150,000 Prabhupada's books. It was early in 1988 when the society was officially registered. So from this 180,000 books printed in Germany and exported into Russia, the whole book distribution saga story started. And because so many people already had the books, even though the problem which was created in 1998 was severe, but still the preaching was going on. New people would come because they were reading Prabhupada's books. At that time, actually, the outreach preachers started their preaching work. We have one of the reasons why Krishna consciousness is spreading so widely in Russia and the countries of the Russian-speaking world, let's say, is that there are many outreach preachers, very powerful and dynamic preachers, who preach Krishna consciousness in somewhat indirect way by preaching some Ayurveda, yoga, this and that, but ultimately speaking about Bhagavad Gita and distributing Prabhupada's books, and that's why so many people join the society. So Prabhupada is preaching. His books are preaching. His followers are preaching. And that's why the movement is flourishing. That's one cause. Another cause is, of course, the special mentality of Russian-speaking people. As we said, that there is some similarities between Indians and Russian-speaking people, and I think it has a lot to do with the language itself, because we see this phenomenon which you already mentioned, that Russian people join not only in Russia, they join in America, they join in Germany, they join in England, they join in, I don't know, in Finland, they join all over the place. And it's not Russians. Of course, for Westerners or for all these Western people, they're all Russians. But it's Russian-speaking people. It's Ukrainians, Belarusians, it's Lithuanians, Latvians. They also joined, the Baltic republics, they're different. The people are different there, but still Krishna consciousness is very prominent. For example, in Lithuania, there is, so many devotees in Lithuania. Krishna consciousness is so much recognized by the society there. And I think to a certain extent, the mystery is hidden within the mystery of the language, because the language creates the mentality, and mentality creates the, how you view the world, the cognitive, the perception of the world, your world view more or less is formed by your language. And the Russian language is very close to Sanskrit language. It's structurally, it's much more close to Sanskrit than, for example, Hindi or even Bengali. The linguistic structure of Hindi is very simple, it's simplified, or Bengali language. It's very simple languages in one sense. Of course, there is a lot of Sanskrit words within Hindi language and Bengali language. It's basically Sanskrit lexicon, so to speak. But structurally, grammatically, Russian language is much closer to Sanskrit than, for example, Hindi. We have the same...
When you say that the language creates that worldview, what do you mean by that? Could you give like an example?
Oh, simple, What is language? Language is actually the experience of people of this land. If we take Sanskrit, we have so many, this is our topic, we have so many words, synonyms of different words which describe love. If we take, English language, we may have, love, affection, attachment, that's about it. But in Sanskrit, you have, raga, anurag, bhav, mahabhav, pranaya, sneha, prema, bhava, and these all different words which actually describe the same phenomena from different angles. It's not the same thing. They distinguish between this. It's a different thing because they not without a reason, they have different words, because it's a different view how you see the object of your description. For example, in Sanskrit, you have around 70 different words for water alone. Around 30 different words for fire. In English there is one fire, just fire. But in Sanskrit you have fire which is there in your stomach, the fire which is there, and there are 7 different fires within this fire. They distinguish between this. This fire is for this yagya, this fire is for this yagya. It means basically that the people of the ancient Vedic culture, they were much more observing and much more careful into this phenomenon of this world. They could distinguish different, 7 different flames of fire, 7 different kinds of flames. This is one kind of fire, this is another kind of fire, this is another kind of fire. So, you can only see in the world outside of you something which is reflected in the language. If it's not reflected in the language, you will not be able to see it. You will not be able to recognize the phenomenon outside if it's not reflected or recorded within your brain through the media of language, because basically we're thinking linguistically. The way we think, we cannot really think. Sometimes people say that I have images, but this is very limited. Ultimately, we think by the linguistic formulas which we have through the media of language, and therefore the language has a lot to do with the mentality of people. Language forms the mentality of people, the worldview, their modus of interaction with other people and with this world. And that's why I think this is one of the reasons why Krishna consciousness is so near and dear to Russian-speaking people.
So you're saying that when the Krishna conscious books were translated, the Russian-speaking people were able to more relate with the philosophy because they were able to understand it via their language in a more kind of descriptive way because of the way the language is.
I think so, because see, what is bhakti? Bhakti is basically an emotional approach to the world. Ultimately, according to our tradition, what is the spiritual world? The spiritual world is called Bhava Jagat. The bodies of the living entities in the spiritual world, they consist of emotions. They consist of bhava. Like we know that in this Babaji tradition, they during initiation, esoteric initiation, they gave this Ekadashi Bhava, 11 bhavas to a practitioner. And the dress is a bhava. Your age is a bhava. So in the spiritual world, everything is emotions. Your age is your emotional attitude towards Krishna. Your dress is the manifestation of your emotional attitude or your relationship with the Krishna and your service with the Krishna. So basically, bhakti is all about cultivating the emotions or refining the emotions, transiting from gross material emotions to the subtle or transcendental spiritual emotions of the spiritual world. Refining the emotions and bringing the emotions, and serving Krishna with the emotions. This is the most important and most glorious service, because this is what is going on in the spiritual world. And the Russian language, which is not so rational, I will tell you a little anecdote about Niranjan Maharaj. Niranjan Maharaj is a very, prominent preacher and a glorious devotee who preaches in Russian-speaking hemisphere of the world for many, many years. He was one of the first preachers who came to the Soviet Union and bravely stayed during difficult situations. So many, many times he tried to learn Russian language. He knows some Russian, he understands some Russian, but it was very difficult. And he he told me actually a little story which blew his mind. he said he was reading some handbook or textbook about Russian language in one of his attempts to learn Russian. And the introduction, in the introduction to this handbook of Russian language, it was said that the beauty of the language is defined by the number of exceptions from the rules in the language. And then it was said, Russian is a very beautiful language. And that's why he just couldn't, foreigners have a hard time to learn Russian because there's no rules. It's only exceptions to the rules. And it definitely creates a mentality of Russian people. The Russian people it's very difficult for them to follow the rules. Russian people are very mystical people because they think that being mystical, they're exempt from following the rules, People who speak English, and because I speak somewhat English, my English is not good, but still I speak some language.
Hey, English is great.
I have a mixed mentality. But Russian people who don't speak other languages, they have a very peculiar mentality, which makes them perhaps not very disciplined people, but very emotionally driven people. People who are emotionally, they base their existence upon the strong foundation of their emotions. And this is actually what, if you read Dostoevsky, you can see, people in the West, they're very much, for them, Russian literature is basically Dostoevsky. And what is Dostoevsky? He describes all these wild emotions which are going on. And for Western people, it's such a peculiarity to see all these descriptions which he's giving in his novels. Anyway, so I think this is at least one explanation. It's my explanation is that. And see, very interesting. Another example about talking about the connection between the mentality and the language. In English, there is passive voice and there is active voice. But the passive voice plays very insignificant role in the English. In fact, if you type something, if you compose something in English and there is too many passive constructions in your composition, your word processor will point out, and the word will say that there is a mistake, make it active. Instead of saying it was done by me, say I did it. So basically, and this is very much reflected in the mentality of English people, they're the doers. They are the controllers. That's why British people, they conquered over practically the whole world, because the tendency to do something, to achieve something, to control something is very strong. American people are the same, and it's very much connected with this active verb system in English. If you take Sanskrit, in Sanskrit, it's much more stylish to write with passive construction, in passive voice. Passive voice is much more it's a better style in Sanskrit if you have more passive voice, because we know that we're not the doers ultimately. That according to the philosophy, we're not the doers. Ahankara vimudatma kartahamiti manyate, only the fools think that I'm the doer. they know that there is the whole reality is much more complex, and it's not only me who is doing something. There is also Krishna and this and that, and that's why the passive constructions are also prominent in Sanskrit, or so prominent in Sanskrit, and so recommended by the style of the language. What is Russia? In Russia, passive constructions are also extremely prominent in the language, but also passive construction, the very name for passive voice in Russian language is stradательный залог, which literally means the suffering voice. Russian people, because the situation is quite oppressive, traditionally, historically, it's a very oppressive thing. The mentality reflected into the language of Russian-speaking people is that Russian people are usually very, they have tolerance within their blood. They can tolerate much more difficulties than the other people. And it's reflected in the language. And we all know, Trinada Pisunichina Tarora Pisahishnuna. This is also sort of mentality conducive for practicing Krishna consciousness. So this kind of tolerance to the external difficulties is within the mentality of Russian-speaking people. They are much more tolerant when it comes to endure the difficult situations in the life. Right. So that's the
going back to the language. When there was translation of Srila Prabhupada's books, you said, there's different angles to look at certain words. So was it more difficult to translate the books because there's for one word in English you could use different words in Russian? So how did that happen?
Yeah, it is translation. It's always an interpretation, because you cannot just really translate literally. You cannot just put one word mechanically, because it will not make any sense. You have to translate the meaning. First, you have to, understand the meaning very well, and the meaning is defined by the context. You cannot just translate one sentence separately. If you only translate one sentence, you inevitably commit a mistake, especially if you translate in the language like Russian. In English, there is a fixed order of words. But in Sanskrit and in Russian, there is no fixed order of words. You can put it this way or that way. It all will be grammatically correct, but there will be nuances of the meaning. You change the order a little bit, it's still grammatically correct, but the meaning is somewhat different, which is sometimes subtle. So it was difficult, and therefore, actually, I mentioned about this madness in Korshna's garden, BBT, North European BBT, when people were translating Chaitanya Charitamrita and they would make a marathon. From the very beginning, I said to myself, I will never go into any marathon when it comes to translation. Because the Russian language was the only exception. It was a very slow language line because it was difficult. From the very beginning, I started translating very carefully without rushing into it. Sometimes I would translate only one page a day, which was unheard of. In Korshnas, you had to translate for, at least 20 pages a day to be a good translator. Sometimes I would sit over one sentence for 1 hour to translate it into Russian, trying to find the proper word into Russian and grammatical structure of the sentence which would reflect the meaning intended by Prabhupada. So it's a very difficult job. But of course, because Russian is so unique and Russian-speaking people oftentimes don't speak other languages, there is a very good, powerful school how to translate other languages into Russian. We have the most beautiful translations of all the literature, English literature, for example, Shakespeare or Salinger, for example, or Hemingway. They're beautifully translated into Russian, expertly translated into Russian. So, and because I was a literature lover, I love literature. I wanted to translate Prabhupada's books into Russian with a style, not just putting some rinky-tinky sort of stuff, but to convey the language. Of course, Prabhupada's books are so powerful that even a shabby sort of translation would work. I've seen it. His message are so strong and he's so powerful and he's expressing his message that even the bad translation conveys his message, sometimes very powerfully. But, my approach was let's do the proper translation so that educated people can also relate to Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's message. So.
Yeah. What do you think, being someone who's been in the yatra for so long, what do you feel are the challenges the yatra faces in growing so exponentially? What are some challenges that you're facing?
As I said in the beginning, the rapid growth creates a lot of challenges because people, when there is a rapid growth, people tend to be quite shallow in their approach to practice. So therefore, as I already mentioned, my approach was always to stress the education, boiling the milk, not the exponential growth, because it's in one sense easy in Russia. People are prone to join, but to make them, established in Krishna consciousness, practices of Krishna consciousness, is definitely a challenge. Because it's one thing to convert somebody, another thing is to make him a real practitioner, a real sadhaka, going deeper and deeper and deeper. And therefore, people easily join, and sometimes they easily go away. There is a lot of influx, and people are coming and going. So this is one of the challenges. Another challenge is that I mentioned to you the mystical or sometimes pseudo-mystical nature of quote-unquote Russian soul or Russian mentality. Russian people are, sometimes they're attracted to Krishna consciousness, or oftentimes they're attracted to Krishna consciousness, to the mystical side of Krishna consciousness, which is good in one sense, because the Russian people, they want to have the real mystical experience. They're not really satisfied with the formal execution of rules and regulations, following rules and regulations and, formalities of religion. They want to have an experience. This is a good part. But the bad part is that sometimes they are, they want cheap mystical experience. They join Krishna consciousness, and this is called, as we know, sahajiya. Recently, I heard a joke which Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj mentioned. He said that when he first visited Russia together with Prabhu Vishnu Maharaj at that time, they experienced Russian devotees for the first time. And while flying back to England, they were exchanging their impressions with each other. And Prabhu Vishnu Maharaj said to Bhakti Vijnana Maharaj, you know what? I think all the sahajis from Bengal and Bangladesh were born as Russian devotees now.
Interesting theory.
So this kind of pseudo mystical liking, like cheap sort of mystical approach when people start imagining something and actually relating to their imagination as real spiritual experience is another challenge, special challenge. And of course, I already mentioned the external challenges, because the Russian society in general tend to be more conservative than the West. And in this conservative society, our exotic religious movement may not be so much welcome. So that's another challenge which we may have.
What do you think the rest of ISKCON can learn from the Russian yatra? In the way it's growing and the way it's churning out devotees, there's something to learn there, I think, from the rest of the world. I don't think we can fully say that, it's just the, I mean, I know you didn't say this, but it's just a language and that's why, but there's other things that maybe we can learn.
When Srila Prabhupada first came to Russia, and by the way, this year is the 50th anniversary of his only visit to Russia. He visited Moscow in June. I believe it was 22nd of June or 21st of June of 1971. He was very much impressed by Russian people. And he said, these people will be the greatest theists. Now they are greatest atheists of the world. And they're trying to spread this atheism all over the world. But as much as they're very great atheists, they will also be great theists. Because Russian people, that's another peculiarity or very important feature of Russian mentality. They're thinkers and they want to know the deeper meaning of life. They're not satisfied with consumerism or this sort of, approach to life. Then just consume, just be happy, enjoy your day, I remember when I was traveling in America, this sort of greetings, when you go to a gas station and the lady in the gas station say, enjoy your day, it's
Or just enjoy.
Oh, just enjoy. This sounds quite quite crazy to Russian people, This sort of superficial approach to life, just enjoy.
Right.
That's Russian-speaking people. They want to find out, to know the more deeper meaning or of what life is all about. And I think that's one of the reasons why the outreach or this indirect outreach is so successful, because you know, people are looking for you know, Russian people are looking for this meaning. And I think, you know, answering your questions, I think the rest of our society, first of all, can learn from Russian devotees their preaching enthusiasm about preaching, because we know that according to Prabhupada's design, preaching is not only the means to spread the movement. Preaching is also the powerful means of our own spiritual development, because this is the kirtan. When we speak about Krishna, glorify Krishna, we understand deeper Krishna consciousness, philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So definitely one lesson which the rest of the society may learn from Russia is the great enthusiasm for preaching, you know, unending and, you know, undying enthusiasm to preach this message to other people. You know, and to get so much inspiration from the preaching, because you know, Russian people are usually very inspired. Russian devotees are very inspired. This is one thing which can be learned. Another lesson which can be learned is that you know, we should not give up. As Prabhupada said, Russian people will be greatest theists because Russian people and Russian devotees, they are stubborn. You know, if they want to go somewhere, they go somewhere. they want to go there. They don't give up despite all the difficulties. They just, you know, if we do something, let's do it, and let's find out what is there. So this determination is another lesson, good lesson. In fact, in the 80s, when the whole ISKCON was experiencing a lot of troubles because of the, you know, zonal acharya problems connected with the fall down of different prominent leaders of the society, the Russian program, which was started by Harikesha Maharaj and was gloriously led by Kirtiraj Prabhu and his wife, actually, Haripuja Devi, was such a big inspiration for the whole movement. I know it because in '87 I immigrated to Sweden, and I knew how much the whole movement was inspired by the what was happening in the Soviet Union, by the you know, the level of commitment and determination and enthusiasm which Russian devotees were ready to endure, to go to prison, to labor camps, even to die for Krishna. That was such an inspiration for the rest of the society. You know, in comparison with it, you know, some of our modern problems can become a peanuts, you know, so you don't really...
Totally.
Yeah, it's like when Krishna consciousness, it becomes something that you're fighting for.
Yeah.
Then it's when the real growth and determination and so many wonderful qualities are created in that crucible, so to say, where there's a lot of pressure happening. Amazing,
Exactly.
beautiful things happen. And I think that's a lot of what's missing sometimes in the West. So, from my own perspective, we're very comfortable here in America. It's a very comfortable life. Krishna consciousness is very easy in the sense of practicing it, but to really imbibe it, become a sadhaka, preach it, share it with others, fight for it. Exactly. Yeah. Amazing story of the Russian yatra. One last question, Maharaj, for you before we end. I know we're coming close to the end here. Looking towards the future, you've seen so much through the years, and now we're looking to the future, the next generation of devotees in Russia, younger devotees. What do you see? Is it hope-giving? Do you see something that concerns you? Or what is your attitude towards that?
Of course, there is a lot of concern because the new generation of people, this internet generation or social media generation, they read less. They prefer, instead of reading, they prefer some audiobooks, and we all know audiobooks means you're driving somewhere and you're thinking about something and something is speaking in your ears. All this social media creates a lot of unhealthy situation by spreading all kinds of rumors and lies and offenses. So this is all areas of concern, and we know that people, when children are too much into all these technologies and devices, they become less creative. Krishna consciousness actually is supposed to invoke the creative nature, but people, due to too much connection with the internet and computers, becomes little dull, when the children see too many cartoons. And sometimes, headlessly, brainlessly, the parents just give them smartphones when they're 2-3 years old. Let them have this thing. But ultimately, it makes you dull because you're not really creative in your approach to world. So in general, that's not about the Russian, but about the new generation. What's going to happen with these people, how they will be able to take Krishna consciousness and to practice Krishna consciousness, which is a challenge in one sense. But I'm also hopeful because there is a lot of enthusiasm, and I can see that young generation of Russian devotees, they're preaching very actively. Like I have some disciples, and every one of them is preaching. And they all make devotees. So, like for example, one of my disciples or students, he takes people to the mountains. He takes a group of people. He knows some different routes, and he gives them experience. He says, you just put aside all your mobile phones and computers, and we'll go for 1 week to mountains. We'll be there, bathing in the rivers and going into the caves and, experiencing this wildlife. And, he takes 20, 30 people at a time. And while taking them, he preaches to them Krishna consciousness. And inevitably, 20 people go with him to the mountains, and a week later, all 20 of them chant Hare Krishna mantra.
Wow.
Or at least become very powerful, very favorable to devotees. And, there are so many people like this, they're doing this little preaching here, this little preaching there. And therefore, I think there will be some sort of revolution, some sort of all this little preaching here and there ultimately will change the situation. And maybe what you said will become true, that there will be 100 temples in a city, maybe. But, now it's, yeah.
One last question before we end. I'm sorry. What is your focus now? Being, not I don't believe you're a manager anymore. There, you're a spiritual guide, and you're a guru and everything. So, what is your focus now been in this point of your life?
I spend a lot of time in Vrindavan nowadays. I study deeply. I'm writing books. And I'm learning Sanskrit language because I realize that language is very important to have the proper mentality. So I spent some time in Karnataka, in Udupi or Bangalore, where there are many people who speak fluent Sanskrit, and from Madhva tradition. I associate a lot with different pandits of Madhva tradition as well. And I spent a lot of time here in Vrindavan interacting with people. And, I still preach. I just came back from Russian tour. For 3 months I was in Russia. But my focus at the moment is to go deeper and to share whatever I will be able to share with other people. Because, as I said, we need deep roots to really be successful in Krishna consciousness, and we have to boil the milk, and I think this is my main contribution. At the moment.
Much, Maharaj. Wow. It was so very wonderful. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. This was like a more historical kind of account, but I know you have so much to offer in the philosophical, theological realm. We can also talk about maybe perhaps I can bring you on. We can talk about something else, maybe something to do with sadhaka, being a sadhaka, or anything related directly to Krishna consciousness philosophy. I think you have a lot to offer there. But thank you so much, Maharaj, again for joining me. I really appreciate it, and I just learned so much about the Russian yatra, and I'm so indebted to you for all the service that you've done throughout the years. I think many devotees don't know it, especially in the West, and I think this podcast will really bring it out regarding all what happened in the Russian yatra at that time. So please, Maharaj, stay on. I'm just going to turn off the recording. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is the Late Morning Program. You can find us on YouTube and Facebook and all their podcasting platforms. Hare Krishna. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.